Have you ever wondered why modern high heel shoes are so bad to walk in? Hello and welcome. I'm Maria from Sew Through Time, and on this channel we usually discuss fashion history, undo hairdos, and make clothing from the past. But this time we're discussing high heels and their history briefly and why modern heels are so horrible to walk in. Editing Maria here to say that I forgot to point out two things. First of all, when I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about it through the lens of historical footwear. And the second part is that I'm talking about fashionable shoes in the West. There were high heel shoes in the East before this time period, and also there was high-heeled riding shoes before this. But this is when we're talking about a fashionable shoe, not a practical shoe. To start off, let's look a little bit at the history of high-heeled shoes. It starts in the 17th century. That is the actual high-heeled shoe with a separate heel and on the shoe. Before that, platforms and different kinds of wedge heels have been around for much longer than that. The high-heeled shoe starts out as a royal men's garment in the French court. And from there, it trickles down to general fashion amongst the elite, and then also slowly to women's wear. High heels are the standard for elite men and women, both during the 17th and 18th century. It isn't till the beginning of the 19th century when heels basically disappear for both sexes. And then as the 19th century progresses into the Victorian era and women start to slowly reintroduce heels into their fashions, men don't follow suit this time, but rather stick with the low heels. As the high heel is introduced into shoes, at the same time, for some reason, also the right and left last disappears from shoes. But shoes are rather than made separate for your right foot and left foot, they're made on the same last for both feet. This makes it easier to mass produce shoes, and they do wear out into your feet so that they become right and left very quickly, much like today ballet slippers. If you've worn a ballet slipper ever, it will very soon mold to your foot, and then you won't be able to wear it on the wrong foot because it will feel completely wrong. The same is true for 17th and 18th century shoes. These high heels at first were quite chunky and big throughout, but already during the 18th century, you do see some very narrow heels. But if you look at them, no matter how narrow they get in the midpoint, one common denominator is that they are still very wide at the base, where it meets the foot. And the reason why this is in these shoes, and basically why modern shoes are also so horrible, is because if we look at the human anatomy, if we look at a person without any heels on, who's just standing, you can notice that the heel is slightly behind. Some of the heel goes behind the person, but most of the foot is pretty much aligned. The heel part, the middle of the heel, is aligned with the entire body of the human. The feet then extend past that, and the heel extends a little bit further. So if we look at that center line, that's where you'll hold the most weight of your body. And that's also the center of gravity for your body, and that's where you'll have the best balance. So if we look at a modern heel, and we look at where that line is on the heel, where the center of the heel goes, and that center line where it would continue up your legs, and then down towards the heel. The actual heel is behind this center point line here. The entirety of the heel, even though the base is wider up here, it curves in. Even that basically ends up mostly behind that center point. So this means when you walk in this heel, not only will you be slightly off balance the whole time because this heel is behind that center point of gravity. So if you step heel first, you are stepping behind the actual heel midpoint. You're stepping behind your center of gravity. And even if you try to land very evenly with your foot, the part where your center of gravity is in thin air. And so because this shoe isn't properly balanced, because there isn't anything there at the center of gravity point, that means that instead of pushing your weight backwards, because that it can't do that, it means that the weight, your body weight will actually, and the pressure point will move forward. So that moves onto your toe and the ball of your foot. So this point is now under a lot more pressure than if there was something supporting here at the middle. So this means that already we're putting the entire body's weight onto basically your toes and the ball of your foot. And that puts a lot of pressure on the foot arch. Because the way your foot is built, it has two main arches that are meant to hold the weight and work as kind of a shock absorber, taking in the shock from impact from walking. So the big arch, of course, we all know, but the other arch is like behind the knuckles of the toes, and that is supposed to be arched a bit like this, so that when you walk, that can flex down, and that will provide a shock absorption. But then when too much pressure is put on that, or you lose or gain drastically weight, especially during pregnancy for women, often that arch lowers itself already. It flattens out. That makes your foot wider. That's one reason why your feet grow with age, because when your arches relax, because they have been under so much pressure and tension from the impact of walking, that they can't hold themselves up like this anymore, so they spread out, and that's what makes your foot grow. But as that happens, the arch is pressed down already, so there isn't any shock absorption. It's just the bone hitting the hard ground. And this makes it so that there's a lot more strain on your feet, and that will cause foot pain quite fast. Here is a turn of the century shoe from the turn of the 19th and 20th century. If you look at the way the heel is balanced, if you look at where the foot, your center of gravity is, and the heel, they align perfectly. It goes well within the heel. And not only that, but if you look at the toe area, these both shoes fit me. They're the same size. But if you look at the toe area, this one looks a lot wider. And even though it is a platform, you can still see, if I align the bottoms of the shoe, you can see that this historical one, goes a lot higher on the footbed. That's where that comes from, because that you can fit the same size shoe, because this actually isn't more narrow than this one. They're the same width. It's just that, or the same circumference rather, because your foot is actually quite flexible. This shoe will press that normally, like if this is like the natural shape of your foot, where the arch is raised and where your foot is naturally at a neutral position. This shoe will press it flat and wide. So that will already on itself cause you to have much less shock absorption on your foot. And this shoe presses your foot into this position. Whereas this shoe will take that natural position and maybe just a tiny bit squeeze it. Not a lot, not enough to cause pressure, but enough to support it so that that arch stays in place. It supports the arch the whole time so that you don't get foot fatigue as you're walking with that, because with the shock absorption of each impact as you walk, because of course the footbed is going to get more shock when you're walking in a high heel, the edges are supporting it and keeping it so that the arch stays there, the shock absorption stays there, and there's much less impact. So you'll have less foot fatigue, and it is better for your feet, and in general, your arches won't as easily be impacted by wearing a high heel. This one is going to be comfortable. This one is not going to be comfortable. I have worn actually these shoes even now when they are well over 100 years old, and I've danced the entire night with them and I've not had any sort of feet problems. Whereas these, I've worn these a few times, but I can't say that I enjoy wearing them, and I can't actually, like, if I would go out now and I was going out dancing, I would never ever choose these shoes because I cannot even stand in them all evening, let alone dance. So where is it that we started going wrong? Well, if we look at this pair of 1930s shoes, these are original 1930s shoes, you can see that if we compare them to the modern one, they still have the much higher like toe area, and it looks much more narrow. But if we look at the heel on this, you can see that that center point of your gravity is already a little further back than the heel. But this heel does still, like, this one you can see that is even further out backwards behind you. This one still has a little bit of a curve onto the heel itself, bringing it a little closer to your center of gravity. Whereas this is actually fairly straight. And this isn't even a bad example. This is actually also 10 years old. Some modern shoes they'll be completely straight in the back so that they almost flare behind you instead of towards your foot. So while the toe area in this shoe is still fairly good and this is fairly well supported, the heel already is not that great. There are more balanced ones in this era still, but not all of them. They're starting to lean already further back and be less balanced. So that already you'll notice a significant difference between like a regular high heel that thins like this and the like chunkier heels. Those will be significantly more comfortable in this era. But then if we look at this 1960 shoe, there you can see these again are the same size, both fit me, but here you'll see that this is already significantly wider. This is already made pretty much like the modern shoe. This is going to be wide and it's going to be very flat this way. And again, the heel is, if you look at where the center point is, it is much further. But again, here you can see that this edge of the heel does still touch that center point of your gravity. So this isn't as bad as the modern heel is to walk in. Here's the modern and the 1960s side by side, so you can see that the width is pretty much the same. They're both very flat. This, of course, with age has like pressed down a little bit, but of course when you put it on your foot, it will be pretty much the same. And then if you look at the heels, you can see that both are way too far back. And so you might ask, is there a solution for this? Like, why are heels made this bad? I don't have an easy answer for that, but I think that a big part of it is that we've just gotten used to heels being uncomfortable, so we don't necessarily demand more comfortable shoes. And another big part of it is that previously women were more involved in the design process. Well, while now most of all of the big fashion houses are mostly controlled by men who do not wear these high heels. So I think we as the consumer just need to start demanding better shoes and not buy the uncomfortable shoes and realize that high heels can actually be comfortable. But as far as what can you do now? Well, since the historical shoes are so great, are the reproduction shoes as great? Well, here I have a pair of American Duchess reproduction shoes. These are reproductions of the same era as these. So these, while not identical in style, they are both my size and they are identical in era. And if we look at them, they have the same kind of balanced heel. This shoe has that, if we look at the center point of gravity, it goes onto the heel. And if we look again at the toe area, these are the same. These are not like particularly narrow shoes. I do actually have quite a narrow foot, but these both fit me loosely the same way. So you can see that this, while this is maybe slightly wider in appearance, it still has that higher toe bed, and they do have that appearance of being slightly more narrow than modern shoes. If you look at this modern one in comparison, this one does look wider than these two, even though they fit the same width. Other than historical shoes, another good option would be dancing shoes. Most, especially ballroom dancing shoes, are made so that they're actually comfortable, and the heel kind of has to be balanced, because if it isn't, then you can't do those turns on your heel that ballroom dancing requires. So those shoes are going to have to be better balanced. And of course, those have a suede bottom, so if you want to wear them outdoors, that's not the best option, but you can have them resold at a cobbler's, and that's not very expensive, and that way you can get really great heels that won't hurt your feet even if you're not looking into more historical styles. And lastly, before I go, I wanted to show what the different styles look like on my feet. The red one is the modern one, and the purple one is the turn of the century one. And here you can see the turn of the century one with the 1930s one. And here's the 1930s with the 1960s one. And lastly, the turn of the century original with the reproduction. Can you spot the difference in fit between the different styles that I talked about? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!